So at closing, I get asked this and lenders get asked this. I just bought my house. I'm excited. I got my key. When is my first payment due?
Yeah, we should probably know that. Yeah, that's a really great question. So depending on what time of the month you close in, you might be able to skip a month in your first payment. So talk to your lender about that. Obviously, generally speaking, most buyers will be able to skip the first month, generally speaking. And then from there, assuming it's just a standard residential mortgage, most of the time those payments are due on the first of the month with a 15-day grace period, which a lot of former renters are surprised to hear about.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think those grace periods for paying your rent is more like 5 days.
Yeah.
So on the mortgage side, once you have a mortgage, there's a little bit more time to get that paid. You have the first 15 calendar days of the month to make the payment. And if it's made after the 15th, then you'd get stuck with a late fee as well.
Yeah.
So
Just pay it on time.
just pay it on time.
I bought my house today. What happens to my earnest money? Do I get it back?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
You don't get the earnest money back.
I knew that.
Yeah. So the earnest money gets applied towards the closing costs. As you know, that is an upfront deposit, a good faith deposit that the buyer is making. And assuming the transaction goes from start to finish, they make it to their closing day, that earnest money deposit gets applied towards their total cash to close figure.
Yep.
The only situation really that a buyer would be getting their earnest money deposit back would be if, let's say, they had a contingency in their contract. Maybe they had a contingency for a home inspection. And the buyer does the home inspection. They're not super happy with the results of the home inspection. Well, they have a contingency for it, which means that if they're not happy with the results of that inspection, well, the contract is contingent upon the buyer being satisfied with their home inspection. If the buyer's not satisfied, they could return to the seller and say, listen, these 3-4 things came up. I don't want to buy your house without those being fixed. Would you mind maybe giving us a credit? We'll put in the work. We'll do it ourselves. Or could you fix it up? They could negotiate that situation. If the seller says, no, sorry, not interested, the buyer could then say, well, then I'm not buying this house. I'm not okay with the home inspection.
Yep.
And in that case, because they had that contingency in place, they could walk away and they would get their earnest money deposit back.
An important conversation to have with your realtor early on in
Definitely.
the process about what's important to you. So what's another word for contingent?
I don't know if I have one word, maybe just a phrase. Legally depends on.
Perfect.
Right?
Yeah. So dumb question.
No dumb questions.
No dumb questions. Who takes care of making sure the utilities are turned on?
That's a really good question. So, and you probably get that a lot in Virginia.
Yeah.
Which makes sense,
Where
and
I
I will
am.
explain. Exactly. So it depends on the jurisdiction. So in the state of Virginia, for example, the buyer is responsible for making sure that they're switching all their utilities over. Electric, gas,
Don't forget.
water. Yeah, don't forget. Those will be important once you move in. So the new homeowner is responsible for all of that in the state of Virginia. It's a little different in Maryland and D.C. In D.C. and Maryland, water could actually become a lien against the property if it's not getting paid. And what does that mean? That a lien from a title perspective, like we want to protect anything from a title perspective, right? Because water could become a potential lien if the transfer is not handled properly at Allied Title. And, I'm sure all the other title companies in DC and Maryland, they are taking care of the transfer themselves.
Okay.
They're making sure that that's switching from seller to buyer for water only.
Just water.
Just water.
So everything else
is still on, like electric, gas. The new homeowner would still have to take care of those in DC and Maryland because from a title perspective, we're not touching those. Electric and gas can't possibly ever become a lien against your property. So from a title perspective, you're on your own. We don't touch that.
Okay. And we're also licensed in 12 states, so those must vary.
It varies
as we go
exactly.
through the Carolinas, Florida.
Completely varies based on whatever jurisdiction you're in. So it's a good question to ask your realtor. Your realtor will know for sure.